I'm Miguel Iturrate, back here on the CRP, and the MMA team is back together again for another full-length Cage Rage podcast. We're up to Cage Rage podcast number 79, and we're going to go with our tried and true subject of MMA news. I'm joined by Devin Miller, my MMA sidekick, co-host, guru, whatever you want to call him. Devin's been filling the void here, and much needed void here on MMA, helping me out. And right now we got a lot on the plate. It's been a busy week. You've got the UFC 236 coming back. The UFC returning after a 1 week hiatus. So it's like if everybody out there, there's a lot of people jonesing their UFC because they missed a week. And we're going to do the wage rage at the end, and then we're going to cover all kinds of subjects in between. And most of the subjects we're going to cover are not good in terms of feel good MMA news. It's like the TJ Dillashaw issue, the Conor McGregor issue, the BJ Penn issue. Dev, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Enjoying a night at home off the road for once. And as you mentioned, we do have some bad news to talk about, but we'll start with the good news. We got this weekend, we got a really good pay-per-view headlined by, it's the first time that there's been two interim title fights on the same card as the headliner. And the really cool thing that I think about these two fights, Kelvin Gastelum and Israel Adesanya for the interim middleweight title, and Poirier and Holloway for the interim lightweight titles. You got four guys that are really in the prime of their career, and they are all four very hungry fighters. They're young, they're coming up, they're on good streaks, and I think these are definitely going to be very crafty fights that could go either way. And I think that's positive news for us to look forward to on in the middle of a sea of a bunch of negative MMA news.
Yep. No, I definitely think they're competitive matches, and I'm not a big fan of interim belts. I really am not. Both of them here, you could kind of see why they're justified, so I won't criticize them too bad for doing it in this particular case. What I do hope happens is that they go ahead and do the title versus title match and wrap it up pretty quick. And don't extend it. I don't like to see, except for in rare case scenarios, interim belts getting defended, for an extended period of time or anything like that. So, you hope you want to avoid that. But let's start off with Adesanya and Gastelum. We're going to do the wage rage a little bit later, but off the top of this, Adesanya's coming in as the favorite, and I'm not quite sure about that. I think Gastelum kind of, was on the cusp of a title shot, had it taken away from him. I think he's played his cards the right way ever since, including, as you pointed out, and gave him pops for on the day of, was, how he handled the, having the title fight pulled and appearing with Seijudo's belt and, making a show of it and making it memorable for people. And since then, he's played it. He's got his title fight, so he's got what he wants. I think he's still very hungry, and I think he might have a wider range of tools in the toolbox than Adesanya. How do you see this one?
Well, we will get to the wage rage. I'll leave the prediction till later when we do the wage rage predictions. But just looking at this fight, you are right that the big concern back in February when Whitaker was pulled the day of the fight to go immediately for emergency hernia surgery, it was kind of heartbreaking for Kelvin Gastelum, who he gets to a title fight, weighs in, faces off, wakes up the day of the fight. He's pumped. He's ready to go fight that night. He's got a world title fight that he's about to walk down to the cage to, and it gets pulled from him 8 hours before the show. And he had to have been wondering what happens now, because they've been grooming Adesanya as the next star of this division, clearly. And so, yeah, you're right. He had like some WWE antics where he went and got Cejudo's belt, was walking around declaring himself the middleweight champion for the rest of the night. And that was smart on his part. It really was, because it kept him relevant. It gave him some personality that people can look to. And So, that was good on Kelvin's part. And he definitely, I mean, if we're just looking at MMA resume, he's definitely got much more competitive leverage on Adesanya. He's been in there with better guys. He's been in there with Tyron Woodley. He's been in there with a lot of good guys. But when we look at Adesanya, we're looking at a guy who's had 100-some kickboxing. I mean, his overall combat record is something like 96-5, 96-5-1. I mean, he's just a born winner when it comes to boxing, kickboxing, and MMA. He's undefeated in MMA. He has this outstanding kickboxing record, and I'm pretty sure he's undefeated also in boxing. So
I understand. I understand what you're saying, and obviously, Adesanya is the favorite for a reason. That's because he does have some good resume items, and also some good performances in the UFC. But this is what I'm looking at. I'm going to just base it a little bit off of. I really don't like his last performance. I really don't like the Anderson Silva fight that much. I think he was put in a very strange position, and but I think psychologically. I almost would have liked to have seen him put the hammer down and go out and just move on definitively. And instead, he was tentative and he let the other guy go ahead and dictate the pace. Now, again, when you're fighting a legend, that gets weird. But now, returning to the ring after that performance, and you've got Gastelum, who was, eager for a fight and didn't get it. Where's his mindset going to be? Is he going to be recovered and looking for the kill like he should be, like he always does, except for last fight? That's the part of it, is he wasn't looking for the kill last fight. And I just see that as a little bit of a bad sign. You don't want to give Gastelum a chance, or make one little mistake here. And, that tentativeness, it shouldn't carry over, but, we won't know until fight day.
Well, one thing Kelvin does very well is he's very good at sitting down in the pocket. And he's got a missile of a left hand, very similar to Conor McGregor, only as a middleweight. I mean, he cracks guys with that left hand. He sits down on it very well. It's just the range. He's gonna be so the length of Adesanya and Adesanya's his experience and. His experience in distance management is very impressive. And we were talking about these interim titles, these two interim title fights on the same night. And the one thing about this fight that we don't have with the other fight at lightweight is with Adesanya and Gastelum, we can almost bet that the winner of this will actually go and unify the belt with the title holder next against Whittaker. Whittaker's being cleared to fight in August, and that's almost for sure going to happen. We don't know if that's going to happen with Max and Poirier, and it's actually there's probably a better chance it won't. The winner of that probably won't fight Khabib next. So at least we know that with this, it's an interim title, which I'm not a big fan of either, but it's almost like it's a number one contender fight with these two right now. And I think that's warranted considering their rules. And another thing to mention about Adesanya has been the most active person in the UFC, bar none, since he got into the UFC. He made his debut last February. In February of 2018, this will be his sixth fight in like 14 months. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I mean, he's been fighting at just a little over 2 months, every 2 months right now, getting in there and fighting. So Adesanya has been very active. Gastelum really hasn't. So some people think that that's a good thing. Some people think that that's a bad sign. I tend to think that there's momentum there. Adesanya's made a very quick rise. We've seen this before with guys, Conor McGregor probably being the last guy that really went to the top fast. And I think we're going to see an even more hungry, aggressive Adesanya this weekend that is going to have a guy in front of him that brings different challenges than what he just dealt with Anderson Silva. But Anderson Silva and him have very similar styles, and I think Anderson's a lot more experienced than somebody like Kelvin Gastelum, obviously. And I think that he was able to recognize a lot of the tricks of Adesanya, and a lot of those techniques were just not going to work on him that might actually work on a guy like Kelvin. But I think Kelvin's going to be more of an offensive threat. So I think this is going to be an interesting fight. I'm looking forward to it.
And let's go ahead and focus in on the lightweight interim bout then, because we got Dustin Poirier, Max Holloway. As you pointed out, for starters, The likelihood they get Khabib next is low, but both guys want that gold around their waist, and in effect, with Khabib supposedly cleared to fight back in the July timeframe. However, he has stated that he'll hold out until November in solidarity with some of his other teammates who took a suspension of a year. And the bottom line is with the UFC, I don't know that things are all that cleared up with them. That we're going to get smooth sailing here with Khabib and get him right back in the ring. If he does, then the logical choice is either a Conor McGregor rematch or a matchup with Tony Ferguson, who's been waiting on the sidelines and has been the number one contender for a long time. So yeah, either way, or in almost all the scenarios, Poirier and Holloway, the winner looks to be like the 1B guy in the division, the 1A guy being Khabib right now, and they may ride parallel to the title and set up a title shot for sometime in 2020 or a title unification for sometime in 2020. But how do you see the fight going in? Because heading into it, Holloway's coming in as a slight favorite. Do you think that's accurate, or is Poirier finally here and arrived?
It's accurate, but Poirier is a very live dog in this fight, man. And I think the fans are gonna be the winners in this fight. But going back to what you were just talking about, we just mentioned with Whitaker and Gastelum, we're not fans of interim title fights, but at least we know that that's a guaranteed number one contender fight at this point. The winner of this is most likely, almost guaranteed, I'd say, going to fight Robert Whitaker later this year. We don't have that guarantee with Max and Poirier because, and as you mentioned rightly, you've got Tony Ferguson, who's not fighting in this interim title fight while Khabib is suspended, who's on an 11-fight win streak in this division. And then you got Conor McGregor, biggest star in the sport, who's out insulting Khabib's wife on Twitter, and it seems to really have just thrown gasoline on an already open flame and really just sparked up, and we covered that in depth last week about how that's just becoming dangerous. And so with that in mind, I mean, this interim title fight just really doesn't make any sense. I mean, it does for Poirier. The whole idea that they tried to set up Tony and Max for the interim title, I don't think made a lot of sense. I think it should have been Poirier and Ferguson, and because they brought Max up into this division, I think a little too soon when he's already the featherweight champion, when this division's already log jammed at the top. And it just made it even more logjam because you've got such a notable figure in Max Holloway. But one thing about him is they can count on him. He will show up to fight. He will put on a good performance. And he's always a game competitor. I think he deserves to be the favorite in this fight. I think that he's going to have a lot more leverage if he does win to possibly pull together the Khabib fight over Tony and Conor than Poirier will, unfortunately, and that's just MMA politics. I worry that Poirier is going to have a hard time selling his case that he deserves to leapfrog those guys, seeing that he got finished by McGregor in the first round about 4 years ago, and Tony Ferguson's on an 11-fight win streak in this division. And the person that he's going to beat to get this interim title was a featherweight who had never fought a lightweight. So that's gonna affect, I think, his chances of being the next title contender, and it's not fair. But if Poirier wins this fight, I think that he has every right, and he's at a good age to where he might just sit out until 2020 until everything clears up and he can get his title fight. Just sit with that interim title because he's young enough to do that. He's not in any rush to get that title fight anytime soon, and I don't see why he would want to risk it unless it was a Conor McGregor rematch or a fight with Tony Ferguson for his interim belt. But then they're going to be in this weird position where they're making undisputed title fights, they're making interim title fights, they've got a guy defending an interim title. It's just a mess in that division, and I don't think Poirier is going to want to fight this. Poirier or Max is going to want to fight this, then fight Tony in, let's say, August, and then try to turn around and fight Khabib in November. There's just no way. And it's a real mess up there, up at the top of this division, no doubt.
It is. Now, let me ask you a question now. Between all the guys we're talking about, even, Khabib, Max, and stuff, like, those would be the two top guys, right? How do they sit on the pound for pound list? Where would you, who would you rate above the other, and what does that look like too? Because it does look like the UFC is activating two of their top guys here, or at least in Holloway, pushing him in rather is getting him is activating one of their top guys here and potentially setting up a match with him and Khabib, which would be more pound for pound, top five guys meeting each other. So you're right. I think Holloway is the most, intrusive here. So it's funny, all this talk and interim talk and stuff like that. It sounds like pro wrestling. That's what we said, right? We might as well settle this pro wrestling style. What they need to do is they need to get all these guys in a room, put everybody's name in a hat, and pull out two names. And those two guys fight. And the winner of that fight fights Conor McGregor in a loser leave the UFC fight. So that way you actually shed one guy and you get rid of a contract here, and that'll help the logjam a little bit. And maybe if it's Conor, that might be helpful for everybody to move on. Then they can always bring him back in 2 years. But anyway, that's pro wrestling, and that's just a little bit of a joke. But seriously, here, like you said, Holloway's the most intrusive guy, and he comes into a division that's already a mess. But don't forget, he's also leaving a division that's sort of a mess, and it's sort of one that he's already cleaned out already. It's still a residual mess from the McGregor days. He sort of solidified things after that, and cleaned out the division, including a pair of wins over Jose Aldo. So he's really got nothing else that he can do there, and that's the reason for him to move on. If his camp decided to move on and the UFC's appeased them, then they've actually done the right thing by Holloway.
Yeah, I actually like the idea. I mean, if they could ever, it's hard enough for them to even get one fight made right now. So this would never happen in this day of MMA, unfortunately. But I like the idea of a Grand Prix at this point. I mean, that would have been something that they're all in the bracket. They're going to fight each other. Put them together at this point and have them fight, because it's just so log jammed up there, and we've covered this. I mean, it makes our head spin doing our phone interviews, just covering the latest fight that they've made. I mean, we've got these fights going on. We just mentioned all these names at lightweight, and we haven't even been mentioning Iaquinta and Cerrone, and Cerrone's on a good run, big name. Iaquinta's a top 5 competitor, and so they're going to be right out there. The winner of that's going to be clamoring for one of these top 3 or 4 guys. So yeah, this division's so log jammed, and I'm hoping it smooths out more. But this is the problem when a champion is out for over a year. By the time Khabib, if he really comes back in November, he'll be out for 13 months. I think they should have been pressuring him that I wish there was no choice for him to sit out that long. That your suspension's over in the beginning of July. We need you fighting by the end of July. We need you fighting, because they got a pay-per-view at the end of July. They got one at the beginning of July, the end of July, and then the end of August. I'd be telling them, man, August, no later than August. You've got to fight, because this is just holding up our schedule so much. We've got all these different contenders. We need to get you in there against somebody, get them out of the way, so we can set up something different. And Tony's calling for it, but if anybody thinks that Khabib's not going to wait till that November card, if that's what he says, and he's going to go back and fight in Vegas when he said he wouldn't, I think they're kidding themselves. I mean, because that's just not Khabib. Khabib's not going to go back on his word. Khabib meant what he said, and he's got a real grievance against Vegas at this point. And so I think he's got enough pull at this point as a name, as a champion, to basically call his shot. And we'll be seeing Khabib almost guaranteed in November if and when he comes back.
To give us another illustration of how useless the boxing commissions can be, so shortly after the Khabib situation, they passed a new ruling and a new legislation that you can't leave the octagon until the official decisions are made for the ring and stuff. So ostensibly, what Khabib would have done by leaving the octagon right there, that's fineable. So they've actually fined like 2 or 3 other fighters, including, I think, Justin Gaethje, for climbing the octagon, cage, and either leaving to the skirt or whatever. And that's the big rule, and that's how these commissions work. You know, they're not trying to help alleviate any of the problems and communication problems with, a world champion who's from the other side of the world. They're just issuing, rules that now say, guys on small shows can't jump out of the ring and celebrate with their people and do stuff, and they're going to eat fines. It's so just another little example of the commission being useless, but they're taking action after that. Oh, it's like we took action after that. Very interesting. I don't know if we'll see Khabib fight this year. We'll see. I think it's 50-50.
Yeah, I mean that's the other possibility. But if they do that, I mean, they probably won't strip him just because of his name value and all that.
I was going to just bring that up. That will be the key signal. Is if Khabib hesitates or Khabib feels he's not 100% satisfied, so he's going to wait or hold out or at least be a little bit difficult, and the UFC says, "All right, we're gonna, that's it, you're stripped." That could almost be a point of no return. I don't know that they'll be able to explain that to Khabib, real well, or if that's going to work out. Now, it's very possible, Khabib's doing a negotiating tactic. It doesn't work out for him. I could see the UFC stripping him if he really becomes difficult, but I think that'll be a big sign. You want to be on the lookout for it. And as you said, they haven't done it yet. I think it is. That's something to watch out for.
Yeah, and they could either just strip him, or they could just have him hold the belt and have Max or Poirier, whoever wins this, just kind of act as the interim, as the serving champion, while the champion's out until whenever he decides to come back with this new interim belt. And I think that is a possibility. I believe that the winner of this Saturday will end up defending that belt down the line. I think that's very possible. I think that's probably more likely than the winner of this fighting Khabib in November, when you've got Conor and Tony floating out there. But that's a conversation we could stay on for a long time. I think we should switch gears and look at, because we haven't covered that yet here on the CRP, but we talk a lot about how these divisions are just in chaos right now, and we got another big hit recently. We've known this for a few weeks that TJ Dillashaw, former now bantamweight champion, got popped for a USADA violation, and Vaughn just immediately relinquished the belt. It's like he knew that the consequences of this was going to be big, and immediately we heard that New York had suspended him for a year, and now we came out this week and we heard that USADA has given him a 2-year suspension. He's not fighting it, and this has been quite the collapse of Dillashaw this year, because he started out this year as somebody that a lot of people were very high on, looking at him as the next, as the prototype of the new version of mixed martial arts, the new archetype of what it means to be a mixed martial artist. And he was dropping down to 25 to try to become a 2-division champion, tried to go kill the division. That failed. He main evented the first ever card on ESPN at the beginning of the year. Rang in the new ESPN deal, got finished in less than 30 seconds, and then popped for a USADA violation, and now is going to be suspended officially until January of 2021. And the question I have for you, Miguel, knowing all this information, is there any way for TJ to salvage his definitely not his legacy, probably, but even just his career at this point? And I'm not so sure there is. I'm not so sure what he has to gain other than just some one-off fights, just maybe a few more fights for some money coming back. I mean, it would not surprise me if he seeks to get released from his contract. I don't see what him coming back to the UFC at this point does him, and how that does him any good at this point. I mean, he has so badly damaged his legacy with this. And as I've mentioned once here on the CRP, you got Cody Garbrandt right now that was a former champion that's on a 3-fight losing streak. I think that it is far less damaging to a career to be in Cody Garbrandt's position right now with a 3-fight losing streak than it is to be in TJ Dillashaw's position, failing a drug screen and get suspended for 2 years, getting your belt stripped and all that. Because not only does it call into question, just some other things, it calls into question even your wins. Like, people look back at your good performances and they're skeptical of them. There's really nothing you can do good at this point. Like, everything is criticized. I mean, people don't even believe you should be allowed to compete. And that it's like that cloud follows you. That cloud is going to always follow John Jones as he enters the ring. And give it 5 years. If he stays clean, keeps fighting, keeps winning, people might quit citing it as much. But when you start talking about John Jones and you get into conversations about him, and at this rate, he's going to be the most dominant fighter we've ever seen, people are always going to have that. They're going to bring that up, the PED violations, the PED scandals, the PED stuff. And it just really hurts a legacy. So that's my question for you when it comes to this TJ Dillashaw issue. Is there any salvaging what he had, what he has, or is this beyond repair at this point?
I think the clear signals are that it's beyond repair. I think the best case scenario for him would be to just ride out the 2 years. I think it's going to very much depend on what he does during those 2 years. I don't know what the right answer is, but there are a couple of things there. I don't know, is being a whistleblower beneficial to him? At least does it make him, somebody who's sending a message and doing something good for the sport and cleaning up, even if he doesn't fight again? Does that help him clean up his image a little bit? Which would become clean, because this is, again, we'll enter into a little speculation here, but one of the things that's notable to me about this whole TJ Dillashaw thing is, all right, when you got a guy who gets popped for steroids, if it's a mistake, it's a mistake. I don't know. I don't believe everybody that's been cleared because they got it in some supplements or dick pills or whatever. I'm not sure that one of them is innocent, but, there've been a lot of people cleared, a lot of people stuff, but they get popped, and rarely do you get a lot of people talking about them as users and stuff like that. If anything, you get maybe an opponent or two who's kind of sour, and you have that in this case. You have Cody Garbrandt. Cody Garbrandt's right for talking a little bit, at least in saying, I fought the guy and he was probably juiced to the gills, and that probably has something to do with it, and I'd like for my record to have those 2 wins cleaned off of it. I can see that, and that's a whole different story. But in this case, it seems like there are more people taking little shots at TJ. Like, he doesn't have a lot of friends here. And like that sort of bond of we don't talk about other fighters, or we don't criticize other fighters and stuff like that. It was sort of crossed on a couple of different lines here. And also him kind of, skulking off, quietly, also leads, he's not asking, he's not giving anybody, you give your story, you give the team's story, hey, supplements, or hey, I screwed up, I'm sorry, maybe you don't do anything, maybe because that reaction to me was strange, where other people in the business spoke up and even just handing off tweets and the new modern social media stuff and things, but there wasn't that solidarity among the fight. Like, TJ didn't count on the complete anonymity or quietness that other fighters sometimes get when it comes to that. And I think that's telling. I think that might mean that there's something to, that he might be an advanced user, that he might be responsible for helping other users and things like that. And that's kind of, the kind of thing that would also indicate why, there would be silence and why they wouldn't want to talk about it or want it to go away. But now if TJ comes out and says, look, this is the scope of things, like a Lance Armstrong type of thing, where he just comes clean and says everything that he's been doing and going on, and people say, holy mackerel, it really is a lot deeper than we thought. That would exonerate him in some way, but he'll never fight again, right?
Yeah, and one thing that has just been different with this than just about any other incident that we've seen before is there's just been no resistance, none. I mean, I think even from somebody, I think his own physical trainer even came out and was just like, "Oh, this was a big mistake. He made a big mistake." I mean, even his own team's just like it's like they have just completely owned it, ate it, and been like, "Okay, we're suspended." There's no fighting this. And what I think it is they've always been able to link this to some contaminated substance. I don't think they were able to do this. I don't think they were able to show any substance that they even had available that had EPO or erythropoietin in it, which is it provides more blood production. It produces more red blood cells and increases oxygen and your aerobic power and enhances recovery and speed and timing and all this. But is why it's classified as a performance enhancer. But so they clearly didn't have anything that had this product in it, and as you mentioned, like people are kind of ganging up. You even had Conor McGregor come out and just throw a lot of credit toward
Right,
Cody Garbrandt.
like that.
Yeah, I mean, just really just sticking it to TJ Dillashaw. One thing it is important to notice. Cody Garbrandt and Team Alpha Male have not been saying this just recently since this popped to TJ Dillashaw. They were saying this before the first Cody fight with TJ when Cody was going to defend his belt with TJ. Cody Garbrandt was out there saying, TJ would show everybody at Team Alpha Male how to use and flush steroids. I mean, he's been really coming at TJ on this issue for a long time. He and so is Uriah, just a little bit more subtly. Uriah's not really the type that wants to sit out there and cause drama, I don't feel like. But they were very bitter at him for leaving the camp in the first place, and they didn't really pull any punches about him when it all went down. They let all the dirty laundry fly when leading up to that first fight with Cody, and it got pretty heated. And so this is damaging. I talked to you once when this first hit, before we got the USADA suspension and all this, that nobody will. People were calling him the greatest bantamweight of all time. He was a two-time champion. He had a very close, razor close split decision loss to Dominic Cruz, and he beat Barao twice. He beat Cody twice. He was seeming like this new breed of fighter, but at this point, there's nobody going to list him as the greatest bantamweight of all time, especially when you've got a guy like Cruz who had more longevity. The only real reason his reign ended when it did, and it wasn't years longer than what it was because of injuries, and he actually holds a win over Dillashaw. There's no way. Cruz is officially, at this point, on any hardcore MMA fans' greatest bantamweight of all time at this point. It's going to be really hard to argue for Dillashaw at this point with this hanging over. He won't even be in the conversation, and it's the best thing that probably could have happened to Cody Garbrandt's career. Because now people are going to really be looking at those Cody Garbrandt fights, and I know how this works. They won't even really count them. They'll count the Munoz fight, but he looked good. He just got caught slugging it out with Munoz. That was a great, entertaining fight, and he laid it all on the line. People are not going to fault him for that one either. So this is great news for Cody Garbrandt. And then you got Conor McGregor coming out defending him, and other people on Twitter defending him. So this could not have been a better news for Cody Garbrandt at this stage of his career, and it's just absolutely horrible news for TJ Dillashaw.
It's funny, we're talking at the beginning of the show, and we're talking about the interim title fight at lightweight, and how Max Holloway entered a chaotic division, and he left the chaotic division, and lo and behold, go one division down in bantamweights, and we're in absolute chaos here as well. So, the UFC really does have, an obligation here to start making some fights and put some time between some of these things, get some of these belts filled. They're going to fill the belt. I saw where Morai and Cejudo is signed, and their odds up at the books on it and stuff. So we could probably talk about that at a later day. Now, did you see the BJ Penn news?
Yeah, this is the third high profile case now of high-profile names in the world of MMA that are having restraining orders and allegations being leveled on them. We had it all started with Matt Hughes earlier this year, which, just a little backdrop for anybody who doesn't know him, Matt Hughes, former great welterweight champion in the UFC, really one of the greatest fighters that's ever competed in the world of mixed martial arts, was hit in his truck by a train in Illinois a few years ago, almost died. He doesn't walk the same. He's got severe concussion issues now, had a severe brain injury, and there was report that it came out just out of the blue that his wife and brother have pressed charges on him and got restraining orders on him because he's had very erratic, violent behavior, and some kind of incident with a tractor in the farm and his nephew, and I guess he's been very violent toward his wife. And I talked to Chad on the phone when that first happened and talked to him about it, and he's not the only one, but there's several people that are speculating that this has got to be some kind of CTE issue. And people that I know that you knew Hughes personally, said that this was not in Hughes's character and that it was never brought up before about him being a domestic batterer. I mean, I don't know the man. I don't know his family. I don't know I don't know if that's true or not. But I know, just looking at what I've seen of him on that mini doc that they did on Fight Pass on him, hearing a few interviews with him on Helwani, that man is not the same. And it's very clear that he's got some serious issues, and I just don't see why his wife and his brother and them would be trying to capitalize on this at this point and really just get him some serious negative press. If it was just his wife, I could kind of, I know how some women can be these days, and men too, for that matter. But publicity whores. That does happen. If we really went digging and tried to write a book about it, we'd probably find hundreds of examples of people who exploited people for their own personal attention. That does happen. But the thing with me is his family. His family's coming out with this, and it's clear that he needs help, and that's a really sad story. But then on top of that, we're talking about BJ Penn today, so then on top of that, we had Tony Ferguson's wife come out and say that Tony Ferguson is going around and he's saying that he's got implants in him, and there's people in their wall, and they're spying on him, and that he would throw water on him, and would say that he's throwing holy water at his wife and stuff. He's acting really erratic and having all this kind of crazy, bizarre behavior. So that was the second incident. We had Hughes, we had Tony Ferguson, and their wives coming out putting restraining orders on them and pressing charges and going to the media about their behavior. But now we have BJ Penn, and BJ Penn's the third in the line, and this is coming out, saying that I'm reading right now from MMA Junkie that Penn's estranged partner, Shailene Aiwa, first obtained a temporary restraining order and petition for an order of protection this past October in Hawaii family court, alleging the UFC Hall of Famer abused her over the course of their 10-year relationship. The order was extended after a hearing in February. It expires October 2021. And she alleges that Penn verbally abused her and menaced her in front of their two children and her mother, threatened to kill her family, and sexually abused her, according to a written statement attached to the protective order and obtained by MMA Junkie via a public records request. She's detailed several episodes of disturbing behavior over the 3-year period and said they are only the most recent incidents. So sexual assault, violent, verbal assault, physical assault, threats, all this. Why is this just now entering into the media? Is something that, especially when he's got a fight coming up, is kind of awkward. Especially if this was dating back to October. Nobody's spilt this yet. which that stuff like this usually comes out a lot sooner than 6-7 months later. But this is unfortunate because, man, BJ Penn's already really hurt his great legacy once a phenom of MMA just by staying around too long, suffering far too many losses. And a lot of people are wondering, the very first thing a lot of people speculated with this is the CTE issue. How much damage has he taken? Is this causing him to act this way? But this woman's saying this is over a 10-year period. So this would date back to 2009 when he was still champion of the world. So I don't. What do you think about this? Because I can only speculate. I don't know these people, so these issues for me are hard to talk about. I can only go by what the reports are saying, and I mean, I'm a fanboy of BJ Penn, but I don't know the man personally. So these issues are. Go ahead.
It's a really difficult subject to talk about, and here's the one thing that, in my assessment of it, the CTE may be an overwhelming issue, and that I think is going to be the main thing that we should address as press or whatever role that we're trying to play here. I think you owe it to each fighter to make an assessment of each guy personally and not just assume, well, brain injury, and so it's they're doing this and stuff like that. BJ, there was also his wife threw out drug addiction in I saw that in one of the press releases and stuff. And I mean, from what I know of BJ Penn, I don't know him personally, but I do know a lot of people know him, and a lot of people know in the business. He's from Hawaii, and I think it's not a huge secret that he's a pothead. But do you bring that up as drug addiction? Unless you're trying to make some type of example or something in the media. Maybe there's something much more. Maybe there's a steroid addiction there. Maybe there's something more than that. But I was at a UFC early in BJ's career where I was walking down the hall of the hotel, and BJ was actually in a conversation with somebody, and he was asked, they tested for pot. He was concerned that they were testing for pot, and so I know he's a pot. I know he smokes pot. I don't think that's a big secret. So that you got to analyze everybody case by case. But this is the one thing I urge everybody to really think of: if there's going to be change or there's hope for bettering this type of situation here. We're talking about TJ Dillashaw. We're talking about the fall of TJ Dillashaw, and a kid who's basically 32 years old, and we may be sealing the deal in his career and his ability to make money on something he's dedicated his whole adult life to, and something he's dedicated his whole adult life to, and done at an elite level, right? And the reason that now what's going on here is this guy hears that there's a substance that allows your red blood cells to produce themselves more and to hold more oxygen so that you can have more oxygen in your body, so that your body is oxygenated better, and you're able to perform better. If that's the benefit of what he took, I can see where you kind of got to think about it. I want to be able to breathe in the ring, and if I can improve it a little bit, even if it's by a small percentage, it might be worth the risk. Because my whole point is now every show out there's little old men collecting pee, and there's old other people checking on blood and taking blood and this and that and the other thing. There's this whole infrastructure of doctors and people in commissions, and all of them charging and working on this whole system of policing this, and they still can't police it because this kid, still got caught here. But, who knows? They probably improved the test. If we looked at it, I bet you that the USADA testing in the last 6 or 8 months had some type of improvement where they're now able to find these substances that they weren't able to find before. Because if Dillashaw has been using for a while, then why didn't it pop up last year and all of a sudden that's probably one of the things that could have happened here is Dillashaw has been getting away with it, and he just does what he always does, but the test improved, so now they're able to identify him there. Anyway, so there's this whole infrastructure there for to prevent the guy from trying to get into optimal shape, even if it does involve using a little bit of science. And there's absolutely no help to check up on guys who spent 10, 15 years of their lives getting hit here, and no one's checking up on them and their minds and scans and just assessments. Just check in. Hey, you okay? Making sure, talking to. There's no infrastructure for that. Meanwhile, like I said, there's, at every show, there's a guy with, I didn't get my pee-pee, and he's putting the tape on the pee-pee, and, the boxing commission's paying for the tape and paying for him and paying for his gas and paying for the bottle and paying for the pee-pee to be taken to a clinic and looked at and stuff like that. And it's still useless because it's post-fight. So now if they're fighting this stuff post-fight, yeah, they suspend it and they destroy a guy like TJ. There was some way that could be effective where they could say, look, hold on, the fight is tomorrow, but this guy's guilty and we're not doing the fight. But we can't do that. You know why we can't do that? Because
money.
Because the promoters are going to lose money.
Yeah.
So it's not really nothing's really protecting the fighters. And here's a case where we're starting to have signs where, you're talking about in TJ not TJ Dillashaw, in BJ Penn, Tony Ferguson, and Matt Hughes, you're talking about two Hall of Fame champions, and the guy who's not might be the best fighter out of the three.
Yeah.
You're talking about elite guys. You know what I mean? So the fact is that if it's there, are there less higher profile cases? Are there cases where we have 3 cases here where the family came out? Are there cases where the family is keeping things private, where they're not coming out in public, where they're not using restraining orders as a recourse, but they're slipping Valiums in the guy's coffee in the morning to keep him calm? I don't know. I'm now making stuff up, but the point is we've got brain injuries popping up. Now it's BJ Penn. And here's the thing is you said, 10 years ago, 2009. Yeah, you know what? It's like, this is rudimentary. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. But if you've walked out of a fight with your head swollen like this, and BJ has, then CET is a little bit something that I'm going to be more concerned about. Maybe it's not a concern. Maybe some doctors will prove me that it's okay to get your face, busted up and your head repeatedly hit so that your face looks like, like you look like a mishmash of what your face looks like. You know what I'm talking about, but Penn's look that way.
Yeah.
Ferguson looked that way last fight.
I was wondering, I was sitting here feeling like we got on rewind, we went back to the Dillashaw show, and then you tied it all in really well together. I was wondering where you were going with that, and you just hit the nail on the head. Yeah, we're policing, and they're policing, enforcing, and as you said, going and collecting pee-pee and blood and all this stuff, but they're allowing BJ Penn to continue to make that walk after he's been battered by Rory McDonald and beaten by men who would have never beat him before. I mean, that Yair Rodriguez matchup, when they put him in there with him, why would they match him up at that stage of his career against that kid? I mean, that just completely destroyed him. And it's really crazy that that we're doing that. That's supposed to be the whole. We're protecting fighters. We're making it a level playing field. We're trying to get the performance enhancing drugs out of the way so that people can be on a level playing field. And I heard you and Chad talking on Facebook Live the other day about that, and you brought that up that is the theory. And the thing is, that's an illusion. That's a total illusion. The only way that can happen is, if we want everybody to be on a level playing field to protect the fighters, then we need to get them all bust. If you're going to fight in the UFC, you got to move to one specific location. You got to have the same gym. You got to have the same amount of money allocated to you. You got to be taking the exact same supplements. You got to have the same trainers. You got to have the exact, and then it's just pure talent from that point on. It never works like that. There's always somebody that has a little bit more money backing them, that comes from a wealthier family, that has more resources to train full time, that has more opportunities to take even legal supplements that they're not banning, that is able to get the better trainers, it has more time to do this, it has a better genetics to where they get injured less. There is no such thing as a level playing field. So this idea that taking away a product that could potentially help them achieve the best performance of themselves. I don't get it. I think that should actually be, if somebody wants to do that to themselves voluntarily and take these kind of supplements, I kind of agree with the libertarian type of view of that, to allow it to happen and actually make it more readily accessible to these people, especially ones that have had chronic injuries or the ones that are at a disadvantage in terms of personal financing. Why can't these performance institutes provide them with certain supplements? And I know they do that a lot at this performance center with the cryogenic chamber and a lot of the recovery stuff that they have now. That's totally legal, but there isn't any set policy to make everything just a level playing field. That's an illusion. But I think the more way to make it more of an even playing field and to actually protect fighters is not to let a battered, worn out, gun shy BJ Penn that hasn't been able to take a punch in years, hasn't been able to pull the trigger in years, is turning the wrong way in heel hooks, just seems like he's just a total shell of his former self at like a fifth of the speed, with no power, with no ability to even last a couple rounds now against B-level fighters. Why are we continuing to push him into that cage? And
here's an interesting question. I wonder, across the United States, with all the boxing commissions and all the MMA being the same thing and stuff, how many licenses for to fight they actually turn down? Because it doesn't look like there's that many. I see promoters announcing cards all the time, and every once in a while you see, they put pending approval by the commission. The commission may not approve the fights and stuff like that, but in general, it just seems like the approval process might be something that could be a little more stringent, could be a little more looked at, or they could choose in those in those particular cases, they feel exonerated because at the end of the day, when BJ Penn fought Yair, he got suspended probably for 3 or 6 months afterwards and stuff like that. So now they feel like they did their job and that's it. But now here we have them down the line and potentially still showing repercussions from that. Obviously what's in place isn't enough, and what's in place in the other situations still isn't enough, because of the TJ Dillashaw situation is again, you took a guy who he went from poster boy to absolute, pariah, like overnight, and it's sort of something where, like I said, at 30, 32 years old, I don't know that what he did was the end of the world. I don't know what I don't know that we don't have other problems. Like, I think it's a much worse problem that we've got champions suffering head injuries, and there are fights, Gary Goodridge is an old timer that is, very public about that. And there are other guys, like I said, lower level fighters that are out there that, there are some stories out there that, that they may be getting some compensation. They may not be allowed to talk about it, so it's best, people, but there's stories out there of guys who are suffering, driving down the road and have to call their wife and be like, what the fuck am I doing, man? Where am I going? They don't.
GSP thinking he was getting abducted by aliens. Remember that before his first retirement? There's been some crazy stuff, and you asked about how many people are they banning license from. This is worldwide. There's still promotions letting Bob Sapp into the ring, which I know a lot of his fights are fixed and they're just kind of like there
was a major boxing commission in the United States, a well-funded commission that recently licensed Chuck Liddell.
Exactly, and tell me that was safe.
Here it's like people forget. Don't forget when he left the sport. Just look up Dana White's speech. I'm forcing him to leave. I don't want to see he's been knocked out so bad anymore. I don't want to see him anymore. We don't want to fight. And that was his own boss. Now, Granted, it would have been absolutely perfect if it was Dana who set up, up the fight. And thankfully, it wasn't Dana who set him up to fight. But of course, some other idiot comes up and puts Chuck Liddell in the ring at 48 years old. It's like I guess I never really realized that Chuck is a year older than me. But he shouldn't have been fighting. But they licensed him. And again, 4 knockouts of the way we saw them. You're going to tell me that there's no damage on a CAT scan? And that's really another part of the problem here, and why we're in a stalemate. And unless the regulations change or the focus changes, we're not going to change this, because doctors are people at the end of the day. So you have immoral doctors and doctors with low ethics. So one doctor looks at Chuck's scan and goes, "Hey, he can fight. He's fine." You're very unlikely to find another doctor who's going to step up and say, "No, I disagree with that assessment. I'm stepping in and I'm denying the license." In fact, the structure doesn't even work that way, But this happens across the board in medical, situations where Chael Sonnen saying if he doesn't have testosterone therapy, he could die. Mm-hmm. He could die. Really? I'm pretty sure I can find a doctor who could look at a guy in the shape of Chael, test him and say, "Your testosterone is pretty low. Why don't you take a weekend off? You don't need TRT." You know what I mean? Right. It's like, so you can always find a doctor. And that's the other part of the problem is there's no policing of that. The Hippocratic Oath is really for hypocrites.
Well, moving on from there, Miguel, just for the sake of time, you said you did watch WrestleMania this weekend?
I did watch WrestleMania this weekend, and I saw a couple of underdogs, and we did a couple of, I'm stepping out of my territory to do odds for WWE and stuff. Charlotte and Kofi Kingston, and there were some interesting fights there. I was wrong on all of them. And in the case of Kofi Kingston, I'm really happy I was wrong, because it really worked out well. And
so was my son. He came running in. He was all happy that Kofi Kingston, Roman Reigns, and he was really happy Seth Rollins won. And the first thing I was thinking about when that happened was, well, that's even more evidence, and they're already talking on Twitter and stuff. It looks like they had Lesnar give up the belt in WWE because he's coming over to fight DC in August, and that's going to be a big spectacle, man. And I don't know. I don't follow WWE enough to really make a call on this, whether he's going to end up going back to that, or do you think that this is his? Was that? I mean, I'm sure Lesnar will do something else to go out properly if he does before he calls it a quit on his pro wrestling career. I don't know if he's going to go back consistently. I'm not sure. Like I said, that's not my area of expertise, but I do see this as like he's coming to the end of when he wants to just kind of relax for the rest of his life, and he's going to do this big spectacle with DC, probably make anywhere from $2 to $10 million to do it, and get a big chunk of change. And it's I think DC will get a big cut also. And I've said that I believe that this is the best way to describe this is a gift from the UFC to Daniel Cormier for being such a great company, man. I mean, because not only is it, I mean, obviously it's not like they're doing him a favor. I mean, obviously this fight's going to be very lucrative for him. It'll be a big spectacle, but for them not to try to maneuver however they could to get it to be Jones and DC and Jones and Lesnar, and to stay faithful to DC and give it to DC, that's showing that they respect DC enough to just not totally screw him and not totally give him the finger, because that would have been the worst slap in the face that they could have ever done to DC had they taken this fight from him, because this is a fight he should win in easily, and it'll probably be his most lucrative fight at this point. But I know I just asked like 4 questions there. I mean, about Lesnar's future in both WWE and in UFC, and what your thoughts are about the UFC doing this for DC and the Jones issue and all that. But take it away.
All right, Lesnar back to the WWE. I'm no expert either. I don't know for sure, but I do know it's been pretty known that there are tension with him in the locker room, and it basically has to do with the fact that pro wrestling is a lot of it is based on your in the ring work and hard work and putting in 250 fights a year for several years and cutting your teeth that way. And Lesnar's kind of privileged; he doesn't have to do that, and his contract lets him take home full timers money, and he doesn't have to do a full timers schedule. Now that's worked its way into the actual WWE scripts on TV, and Seth Rollins actually brought it up, and you're finally gonna have a champion that actually defends his belt and stuff like that. It's been part of the rhetoric, so it's a little bit hard to tell exactly how much of that is real and how much of that is show, but at least a little bit of that is real. The guys can't be happy with Lesnar stuff in that. The way Lesnar went out this time with Seth Rollins after basically, a full scripted match. There wasn't even real action in that fight, except for, he got his 3 suplexes off, and then, the setup came for the curb stomps, and it was over. So it was a full scripted match, and that, it's telling that they didn't let him look good at all, really. And they went out kind of with a whimper and stuff. So that's where it opens up, like, how does he come back? Because the fact is that he's always been the beast. And now you've got a guy that's going by the Beast Slayer. So it's going to be hard to see how Lesnar comes back, unless he actually says he comes back is good. Look, I'm going to sink 2 to 3 years into a full-time schedule and be on top, But that's for another conversation. If he happens to beat DC, we're in a whole world of seeing him in the in the UFC for a little bit. And I think that'll be interesting. If he beats DC, do they give DC I think they dick DC no rematch and they move right to John Jones and Lesnar if that happens. And that would be actually the wrong thing to do, but I think that they're very capable of doing that, and that's what we'll probably see there. I think it is a nice gesture for DC. I do think that they had pressure and that at least they had to think about slipping Jones in there, especially since he's come back and he's successfully done that. And the fact that they didn't do that, I think my hat's off to them. I think they're doing the right thing by DC. I think at the end of the day, we've got one big question here to answer, and is that what kind of a draw is Lesnar now? Coming off the WWE, I mean, I know the last time around he was part of the biggest shows and the biggest fights and pay-per-views and stuff like that. But, it's the same act. It's the same thing. We've seen it. He's coming off a loss. He's 5-3 in the UFC. How much of a draw is he really? Are they going to equal what Lesnar did last time? Are they going to get to 80% of it? Is it going to blow up and they're going to do double? Of all those 3 statements, the one where it says they'll do double the pay-per-views this time that they did last time for Lesnar, that's the least likely to happen.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you were talking about on a previous thing about Conor McGregor, about needing a new gimmick as he gets older. I mean, I remember back when Lesnar first made his debut against Frank Mir inside the Octagon. There was hype because all we knew is this 106-5 collegiate wrestler, this beast of a man, and we seen slow slow heavyweights that couldn't wrestle, and there was a lot of anticipation for his star power as well as his skill set coming into the Octagon. It's not going to be like that, but I still think that they'll be able to recycle that star power and use what he still has left to generate enough energy to pull together a million or so pay-per-view buys. And I think it'll still be pretty lucrative for the company, for Lesnar, for DC. And I think this is perfect timing compared. We just did the Pride thing last night talking about Hickson and Takada, and here we are, 22 years later, and we're still doing this MMA legend versus a pro wrestler. Because when we really look at Brock Lesnar's fought 3 fights in this decade, and he hasn't. And he technically at first did ragdoll Mark Hunt for 3 rounds, but he was finished in the first round by both Cain Velasquez and Alistair Overeem looked completely outmatched in both those fights. And then the Mark Hunt win was overturned for a PED violation. I mean, so he does not have a win in this decade. He's not an MMA fighter. And I'm not saying that he can't beat MMA fighters. I mean, of course he can. He can probably still be a top 10 heavyweight. But it's a spectacle. It's them bringing in. It's the same thing with Ali and Inoki and Hickson and Takada and other examples of them bringing in a spectacle against the fighter. And that's what we're going to get with DC. And I think, and I don't want to spend the time tonight talking about it because we're going to have so many more opportunities to talk about it leading up to that fight. But I do believe that that number one, the WrestleMania loss to Seth Rollins this past weekend definitely cleared the way for what about what the rumors are coming from Helwani and Brett Okamoto and all that this fight is being targeted for August in the UFC for the heavyweight title with DC. And I definitely think that with Jones fighting the month before and then DC fighting, getting his Brock Lesnar fight, I think it is going to set. I think that is what the UFC is going to target, is to try to set up Jones and DC at heavyweight later on. But like I said, I don't want to spend too much time tonight. We can go with that because we're going to have so many opportunities to talk about that. If you don't have anything else to comment, we could probably go on to the wage rage.
All right, let's go ahead and hit the wage rage then. All right. We've got the UFC 236 at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia, this April 13th. We looked at the odds earlier in the week, and right now with Devin, we're going to make some picks for the main card fights. How you want to do this? You want to go from top to bottom or bottom to top? I've got Holloway and Poirier at the top, and the openers for the pay-per-view are Krylov and St. Pro.
Let's start with Krylov and Ovince St. Preux and then move up.
Okay, terrific. Light heavyweight action sees Ovince St. Pro and Nikita Krylov squaring off. A near pick-em fight with St. Pro at minus 105, Krylov at minus 115. How do you see this one going?
Well, it's important to note with this fight, the first thing is Ovince St. Preux is the only one ranked out of these two. He's ranked it right now at number 12. St. Preux is coming off a third round. In the books, it's listed as a third round a decision loss to Dominic Reyes, but he got knocked out at the end of that third round. And anybody who watches that, remember that. Krylov was on a 4-fight win streak. All of those 4 fights were outside of the UFC. But then he came back into the UFC for a fight against Jan Blachowicz and lost in the second round. They don't have Krylov ranked, but this is a rematch dating back to 2014. And one thing that I looked this up in preparation for this, back then St. Preux was a very heavy favorite to win, and St. Preux actually won that fight by a Von Flue choke in the first round. Now, these days, the odds are a lot tighter, and there's a reason for that. I think a lot of people are starting to figure St. Preux out a little bit. I think that this will be a primary striking fight. I don't think he mixes together strikings and takedowns well enough. I think Krylov shines in that type of an environment if he's not facing a Misha Serkinov or a Jan Blachowicz who's able to grapple him and take him down. I think that's St. Preux's best strategy in this fight, but I think that Krylov's going to be able to be the sharper striker on the feet and keep this fight mainly on the feet. And I'm going to go with Nikita Krylov to beat Ovince St. Preux.
And that's the light heavyweight opener of the pay-per-view this Saturday. Moving on up the card, we got welterweight action. Again, a nice tight line here. Dwight Grant, a slight dog at plus 105, taking on Alan Juban. Juban minus 125 on the comeback. Give us your scoop on this one, Dev.
This one's a hard one for me because when you look at Joban, he is 37 years old. He's been a talented guy, but has always just kind of been a journeyman. And he did just kind of have a pretty emotional win over Ben Saunders because he needed that win. He was on a 2-fight losing streak before that. But he's been in there. I mean, those two losses were against Nico Price, who we just saw recently pull off a big knockout, and Gunnar Nelson, who we know is really good. But he does also have wins over guys like Bilal Muhammad, who's a really good fighter, and Mike Perry. And so he's been solid, kind of inconsistent, up and down. And then when we get Dwight Grant, he's coming off the Contender Series. I'm pretty sure, yeah. And he's 1-1 inside the octagon. He lost a split decision to Zach Otto, and 1-1. I think that he's more on the way up than Joe Bonner. This one's a really hard one to call. I think Joe Bonner has more experience. I think he's a little bit sharper of a striker, but just from the fact that, oh man, this is a hard one for me. I went back and forth with this one because Ben Saunders is a very good fighter, and he just beat him. But I also see Ben Saunders has been in a lot of wars and stuff. I'm gonna go on a limb. I'm gonna take the dog pick with this. I'm gonna go with Dwight Grant. I think that he's got more momentum behind him. I think that he's gonna be a little bit more hungry than the 37-year-old Joe Bon, who has showed that he can be a little inconsistent at times, even though he's lost to good fighters. I'm gonna go with Joe Bon.
Yeah, you mean Grant, right?
I mean, yeah, I'm going to go with Grant.
Okay. And moving on to more light heavyweight action, we've got Khalil Roundtree taking on Eric Anders. Anders coming in a 2-1 favorite at -200. Roundtree coming back at +170. A little wider line here. Anders expected to do well according to the books. What do you think?
Yeah, see, this is really a bit must win for Eric Anders at this point, who was brought in. They even gave him main event slots against like Lyoto Machida and Thiago Santos. I think he took the Santos fight on short notice, and he's had some exciting fights. But Khalil Roundtree is a powerhouse, and he's coming off a first round finish from Johnny Walker. Before that, he was on a 3-fight win streak and even knocked out the legendary kickboxer Gokhan Saki in the first round. He's got big power. He's not afraid to throw it. And I guess apparently he went to Thailand after the Johnny Walker fight to work on his clinch game, because Johnny Walker just ate him up in a clinch and ended up knocking him out with elbows in the clinch, dropped him, and it was a vicious knockout. I still think there's a lot of upside to Khalil Roundtree. I think he's a very tough fighter, and there's been moments where I'm like, man, he could be a big contender at this division. Still very young. I have more faith in him. I think that the physicality might be in Anders' favor, but Anders has fought down at middleweight. I think Khalil is a little bit bigger. I think Khalil's more a heavier puncher. I'm going to go with Khalil Roundtree in this fight.
And another underdog there. Let's go ahead and hit the first of the interim title fights. This one obviously in the middleweight division. 5 rounds of action. Kelvin Gastelum, Israel Adesanya. Adesanya the favorite at -185. Gastelum paying back at +160. What are your thoughts on this one?
Very close fight. Very good fight. Two in their prime, elite level fighters that are hungry, that want that gold around their waist, that it's the perfect time for both of them. The thing with me is Adesanya has so much history in striking matches of distance management. He has a more diverse tool bag to work with, and he's also definitely taller and longer than Gastelum. Gastelum's going to have to try to make the fight a little dirty. I think he's going to need to mix it up. He's got really good wrestling. He's a much better wrestler than Adesanya. But Adesanya's, and this is a step up in competition for sure for Adesanya compared to a 43-year-old Silva who plays right into his style, and then a Derek Brunson before that. So this is a big step up for Adesanya. But I think we're going to see Kelvin reaching a lot for shots. I don't think he's gonna get the fight to the ground very easy, and if he does, I'm not convinced he's gonna be able to finish the fight there. I think Adesanya is going to be the more diverse striker. I think he's gonna be really hard for Gastelum to really land that solid shot on. I think it could potentially be a good fight, and of course Kelvin could win this fight. and Kelvin's got very good boxer. He's really become a very elite boxer wrestler. But I think that the diversity in the strikes from Adesanya will be the difference in his ability to manage his distance and use his techniques effectively. I think this is going to be probably Stylebender's best performance yet. I'm going to call Adesanya to beat Gastelum either by a finish somewhere in the third to fifth or a unanimous decision.
And the main event of the evening in the lightweight division, another interim belt going home with the winner, Max Holloway, moving up in weight as the favorite, minus 210. Poirier, Dustin Poirier, the diamond, returning at plus 175. And this one here could lead to Khabib, could lead to Conor. What it does is it leads to an interim title that, as we stated in the earlier part of the podcast, they will probably be defended before they get to unify. But how do you see this Saturday going, Dev?
When we look at Max Holloway, man, we've known for a long time that he was not going to be able to keep his career down there at featherweight. He's a very big man. He's gonna fit in this division just fine. He's gonna have more power in his punches, probably more pop, more energy, and he is just relentless. When you look at the amount of volume that he threw on Brian Ortega, it never slowed down. It's really amazing. The thing with Poirier is he's not just going to stand in front of Holloway and take shots, eat them, and try to land a big shot. I mean, Poirier moves well. He's got good head movement. He's got a wide set of striking techniques, and he's got a lot of firepower in his hands. And I do think that Max is the favorite in this fight, but Dustin is a live dog. I mean, if somebody wants to take a bet on him, I don't blame them. I mean, he's motivated. He's on a good streak. And we just saw Justin Gaethje. I mean, in his fight with Justin Gaethje was just bananas. It was great. And Dustin Poirier is somebody who is just seasoned and blossomed into his true potential that we've always knew that he had. And he's 30 years old. He's in his prime. He's hungry. And he has a win over Holloway. Now, granted, Holloway was like 20 years old at the time. And if you look at looking at just a few little footage of that fight, you can tell it's nothing like what the Holloway we got now. But the thing, the Jose Aldo fights are what stick out with me with Max Holloway. The way he was able to just measure Aldo so effectively and use his movement to gauge his distance. And when he really and the same thing with Anthony Pettis, same thing with Jeremy Stevens, when he really starts finding you and getting off, he's really good at backing guys up, putting together combinations and breaking guys down. And I'll be honest, I've seen more willingness to start fading out of a fight from Poirier before than I have from Holloway. And I think that in a 5-round fight, I think this is going to be a slug. I think the fans are going to be the winner in this fight. I think this is going to be a very exciting fight where they both have their moments. But I think it's going to be a fight that, even though it's competitive, we know that Holloway is still controlling it and dictating it. And I think he starts to take over by the third round. And I think that Holloway's going to end up either getting a late finish or just really taking over by the middle of the fight. And I'm going to go with Max Holloway to just outgun and be a little bit sharper, a little bit better with his head movement, a little bit better using his range. And I think he's gonna come back and avenge his first loss from at the hands of Dustin Poirier in this fight and become the interim champion.
And that might set up a trilogy. We'll see how that goes. That is definitely an interesting pick with Max Holloway. Like I said, Holloway, the featherweight champ, moving up. So he's looking for that champ label and actually to follow in the footsteps of Conor McGregor. All makes it interesting, all interesting storylines this weekend for UFC 236. I'm Miguel Iturrate for the CRP. I've been joined by our MMA ace, Devin Miller, to make picks for UFC 236. That's the Wage Rage. It's in the books. We'll catch an update on the fights on the day of, and obviously we'll check in after the fight.